Well, welcome everyone to the CG webinar number. We're not sure which, but we're close to 400. We're trying to find out which will be our 400th webinar so we can make a song and dance on that day. Today we've got Bowen Zhang, who's going from University of Manchester. Very important place for research on international students. We have a lot of contributions from the university. And her topic is, has the International Joint University lived up to its promises? You'll find out soon which international joint university she's talking about. But before we start the webinar, before I fully introduce Bowen, let me take you through some housekeeping. Now, remember that the webinar is being recorded and it will appear on our YouTube site, our YouTube channel fairly soon after this. And you can, of course, watch it there forever. We're finding more people tuning into our webinars through YouTube than live. But of course, if you're with us live, as those who are in the webinar are, you're able to make a direct contribution to the discussion yourself and be immortalized on YouTube along with Bowen. Now, during the webinar, we advise you to keep muted. Keep your microphone off, and you don't have to have your camera on either, but we want you to turn both of them on when you come into the Q&A part, the discussion part of the webinar. We advise you to use speaker view in the top right-hand corner there, which enables you to see exactly who's speaking at a given time. Now, to enter the discussion, and the discussion starts round about halfway through, use the chat function. Post your comment or your question for Bowen into the chat, and then I'll be able to select you from there into the discussion. I'll send you a note in the chat saying you're next, and then I'll invite you to speak. And when I invite you to speak, do turn on your microphone, most important step, and turn on your camera if you can do that, and then tell us who you are, where you are from, and then you come out with your question or your statement. So do take the opportunity to come into the Q&A, and if you want to, make sure you post your intention early, because if you post it at 5 minutes before the end of the webinar, it's possible the speaking list will be full and you won't be able to get in. So do come in early as you can, really, into that queue for the Q&A. Now let me introduce our speaker. I'll stop the share. Bowen Zhang is currently pursuing a doctorate at the University of Manchester, and her research interests revolve around the internationalization of higher education, with a critical focus on the exchange of knowledge through educational, and I've got a I apologize, Bowen, but my printout is not telling me the rest of your description. You'll have to tell us more about yourself through your presentation. But doctoral student at the University of Manchester, an active participant in our webinars. We're really pleased that she's been able to come on and present today. Bowen, the screen is now yours.
Sure. Thank you, Simon. And yeah, definitely we'll talk more about my research interest during the actual presentation. So yeah, let me just share my screen at first. One sec. Yeah, should be on the screen now.
Yeah, we can see that. That's good.
Okay, right. Okay, so hi everyone. Just as Simon just introduced me, I'm Bowen Zhang. I'm a PhD student at the University of Manchester, and specifically Manchester Institute of Education. So I'm nearly finishing, but I just stopped saying which year I'm in because that's gonna take it too long. So just stop saying which year I'm in. I'm just saying I'm a final year PhD student, who is nearly finishing. And yeah, so today I will going through some of my key findings. actually throughout my whole PhD project. So it's gonna be quite long, but I'm just gonna skimming some of the details and to trying to tie different projects of my whole thesis together, and just to give you a sense of my research in terms of this in terms of the area of international joint universities. So I don't know why this picture is stretching, but anyways, my research largely situated in the realm of internationalization. So sorry, just one sec. Okay. So generally, internationalization has been portrayed as promises and commitments to benign and overall progressive activities. So I think there maybe I don't need to introduce that much, but there's a classic definition by Jane Knight. I know Simon has recently criticized a lot, but this definition is kind of influential and generally portrayed internationalization as something desirable and progressive. And also, I think this question, pops up a lot in my research, which is, can internationalization actually be defined, in a predetermined manner? So if we have this a planned approach to internationalization, does it potentially undermine the spontaneous interactions and the development that arise from practice? So with that in mind, so my research would really acknowledge the ad hocness of internationalization. So that means, so my stance of internationalization would generally be, it is a ongoing process. It is a kind of institutional commitment and also some ad hoc collection of international and cross-border activities. So when I say ad hoc, it generally means that, so at first it didn't recognize as something called internationalization, but this activities have been conceptualized afterwards in a retrospective manner as internationalization. So that is kind of my take in it, and will underpin my research throughout. So next, I will introduce a specific part of internationalization, which is internationalization at home. So this means so this is abbreviated as IAH. So this basically means that it is not, it is not about the mobility of individuals. It's not like the geographically mobile individuals. It's more about bringing internationalization institute, so at home. So this is like bringing international elements to the domestic HE provision. So there is a certain assumption, or I would say promise, within this talk today. So this is, I think this is some promise of internationalization at home, which is to be offer a democratization of the benefits of internationalization to much wider segments of society than that which could be or wanted to be abroad. So this is like when certain individuals are constrained in their ability to be involving in internationalization abroad, this option gives them a more democratized option to involve in internationalization. And sorry, so institutions, they can construct their own ways of living up to perceived promises of the internationalization at home. So different institutions, they can choose to involve in this discourse according to their own understanding and develop their own strategies, as I'll be talking more later. And also, I think it's important to situate transnational higher education, which is TNHE, as an embodied form of the promises of internationalization at home. So I think I got TNHE at this stage. I got lucky I have this definition. So TNHE is the kind of a mobility of a program or the institution or provider between countries, or there is another pretty classic definition from Council of Europe, which define it as where learners are located in one country where they are awarded in a different one. So there are a lot of different forms of teenage institutions. So according to Wilkins, they can be categorized into a lot of types based on different premises, suppliers, and target students. So these would typically include more well-known types as branch campuses and joint venture institutions. So we can see that TNHE is basically fulfill the promise of internationalization at home, where there are people cannot be geographically mobile. They can choose to involve in an institution that does not have to cross the national border. So specifically in China, there is a particular situation that there is a policy document called the Regulations of Chinese Foreign Cooperation in Running Schools. So schools, it's a bit different from where we call higher educational institution, but schools here generally means universities. So in this policy document and in this particular statement, this article, it said that there should be no foreign educational institution. There should be no such thing that they can establish like unilateral universities to provide education to Chinese citizens. So that means branch campus is out, because branch campus is usually established by a foreign institution rather unilaterally. So that's why all TNHE universities in China should be joint venture institutions. So when I say should be, it means that there should, when it comes to talk about reality, there are more nuances and different interpretations and understandings of institutions that transcend beyond this simple statement. So now I would just briefly talking about how TNHE is demonstrated in China, in Chinese higher education as a whole. So as I just said, that TNHE institution can show very different variations in their practices and daily operations. This is generally depending on the nature of their partnerships or founding institutions. So in China, there are institutions who have, whose parents' institutions are both very strong, so they can operate more like a joint venture, where the parents' institution can share their curriculum and academic decisions, whereas there are institutions whose Chinese parents are generally recognized as academically weaker than their foreign counterparts. So they can be in reality more similar to a branch campuses. So that's how, this is just an example of how the reality can be more complicated and nuanced. And there is a scholar thing in 2019. They talk about how TNHE can be relatively flexible and less government controlled, but they're supposed to reshape Chinese HE landscape, because with most public universities monitored and controlled by the Ministry of Education in China, TNHE relatively represent a flexible and less government controlled form. However, they are also kind of expected to change the HE, the higher education landscape, so that kind of contradictions and paradox result in some marginal revolution, as according to this scholar is saying. And also that since TNHE is not a really established, it's not really long established phenomenon in China, so there can be sometimes inaccuracies and inconsistencies in policy language that fail to reflect the actual needs and have proven challenging to implement in practice. So yeah, this point I will also elaborate in my actual research. And also some people were concerned that TNHE, despite its promises and its democratization assumptions, it kind of still tends to benefit economically developed area. So this contradicting the supposed principle of internationalization at home. So TNHE is generally established in more economically developed area with relatively high tuition fee that kind of attract those wealthy students and families, which are less beneficial to the social equality. So I have a research question here. It's not my actual, PhD research question, but it's kind of aligned with this talk. I would say I will be mainly answer this question. So has the International Joint University lived to its promises of internationalization? So I know that in my title, it does not have internationalization in it, but I think generally, International Joint University or TNHE institutions as a whole are portray themselves as internationalized and are developing some understanding of internationalization that trying to influence their audiences. So I kind of add internationalization here to make this research question more answerable and specific. And I will be approaching this question in the following 3 sub-questions. So first of all, how did International Joint University construct internationalization through its website? So the reason I choose website specifically is because that TNHE institution generally have a really promotional, they use heavy promotional language on its website, which clearly outlined its, for example, vision, mission statement, its aims of objectives, and also how they portray internationalization and how they ideally attract students. So that's why I kind of choose this, and also because it's relatively easily accessible and it's publicly available. So that's why that website is a starting point of me answering this question. And also my second question is, how do returnee staff engage with internationalization? So this point I will also elaborate later, but briefly, there is not a lot of research on returnee staff. So when coming to TNHE institution, there are all kinds of literature around international stuff and their cross-cultural adaptation and things like that. There's not so much around, how Chinese staff engage with internationalization in their own country, and also better align with the principle of internationalization at home. And also my third question is about students. So it's kind of a natural flow, which going through the policy, website, staff, and students. So how do Chinese students engage with internationalization? So these are my research questions. So now I will talk a bit on some lit review that are relevant to these questions. So first of all, there are various literature exploring internationalization through website. So for example, the language pertaining to internationalization can be seen as compensatory. So for example, there are studies on how when a university can not achieving its desirable ranking, it used internationalization as a compensatory move to portray itself as high quality because it is kind of internationalized. So that's why I'm saying here that the language related to internationalization is kind of delicately balancing between its own performances and a standardized set of benchmarks. Sorry, and also internationalization can be conception creating. They can teach us something. So when internationalization has been incorporated in university websites, it is intended to serve as both a guide and a standard for institutions seeking to translate policy into practice. So there's a research talking about how when institutions are actively incorporating internationalization in their vision mission agenda, it is trying to bring it in reality instead of put that on the pedestal as a isolated concept. However, there are some challenges when we're trying to incorporating internationalization into websites. So there are neoliberal pressures. So neoliberal discourses and influence, they can limit universities' ability to adopt diverse strategies for internationalization. So this means that the universities are kind of adopting a homogenizing approach into portraying internationalization. So basically, they are subject to the influence and pressure to enhance their rankings and attract more students. That's why they kind of get into internationalization in a very similar and homogenized way. So that is a concern of how they can develop diverse strategies. And particularly regarding TNHE, so generally it's emphasizes itself being international and leading. However, there's not that much justification. And I include a quote from Buckner and Stein to saying that universities are generally focused on how can internationalization be successful rather than promoting thoughtful engagement and analysis about why we should do it. So next, I will be briefly talking about how staff are engaging in the internationalized environment in TNHE. So as I said before, when it comes to TNHE internationalization, most of the studies are focusing on international staff and faculties, the expatriate staff, rather than the domestic or returning staff. So what can the literature of international staff tell us? So it is generally a motivation. It was supposed to create a convenience and a similar environment to a lot of Western foreign academic environments that should be familiar to academic staff. But there are a lot of challenges. So I say this is kind of mismatched internationalization. So staff can come to the university with a really ambitious agenda, maybe to really improve the Chinese HE landscape. However, the actual unfamiliarity with local context can diminishing their ability to contribute. And that's why they sometimes can experience marginalization and isolation. So these unpreparedness and difficulties resulting in the gap between their expectations and their lived experiences generally cause a mismatched situation when it comes to an internationalized environment in China. But academic staff usually engage in this kind of environment rather creatively and selectively. So although the TNHE environment are usually require a 100% English medium instruction, some of the staff, so for example, the staff who are capable of speaking Chinese, they kind of employ a flexible selective strategy to switching between the two languages. However, since this is not exactly what the policy requires them to do, so they are constantly being exposed in the fear of being caught. So that's why they are caught in a dilemma between the symbolic significance of English and its actual teaching and learning impact. So yeah, these are the stuff situation. And now when it comes to students, a lot of students are attracted. So a lot of Chinese students are attracted to TNHE because of a series of push and pull factors. So there is a particular phenomenon that a lot of Chinese students do not see TNHE as their first choices. So they usually saying when they have an unsatisfactory university entrance grades, that's when they start to think about the the other more compromised options. And some students would see that as a substitution of studying abroad. And also alumni recommendations can wield really heavy significance. So Chinese students are generally view TNHE as very similar to Western English speaking higher education system, where different language is a primary mode of communication. So that kind of shapes their primary expectation before they enter in the TNHE. Well, yeah, and I also want to talk about how when students are actually experiencing much more than language, however, this has not been legitimized or promoted by the university. So that's maybe related to the promotional priorities of TNHE, which often focusing on those quantifiable indicators to boost students' enrollment, while they can ignore the actual full-year experience on campus. So there are challenges with internationalization. So most significantly, in an environment which requiring you to speak 100% English, so students can feel really challenging about that, because they feel like that in this kind of environment, they can neither improve their English nor use that to comprehend course material, to actually learn something. So that's why students sometimes can feel that their expectations and the prescription promised by the university has been challenged, because they don't feel like they can actually learn some useful content to enhance their grades through English as a tool. But I also want to end the literature review with a note that students appear to derive some benefits from their experience of managing risks and challenges in TNHE. So for example, although students feel really challenging about learning contents in English, actually they have adopted some strategies. For example, they also use Chinese textbooks to help them understanding. And in a piece of study conducted by Gu and Li, they said that this kind of bilingual exposure actually benefits students. So in that way, their understanding of internationalization does not confined to the English only environment, but to be more inclusive as internationalization would have been. So yeah, so these are this is a long review, and so now I will talk about my research, some of my empirical research. So I have adopted a mixed method. So it's a single case study design of an international joint university. I will just call it X. So the research instrument I use is a document, mainly website research, and also interviews and focus groups. So I've got 11 Chinese academic staff and 29 Chinese students that they were working or studying at this university when I conduct interview with them. And also I have some documents. I have 55 pieces of university news and some vision and mission pages, which covers their AMS objectives and so on. And data gathering, this is conducted in pandemic period, so it's all online with some convenience and snowballing sampling techniques. And I analyze these data through both inductive and deductive thematic analysis. So I will talk about my first finding about, so how does this university construct internationalization as showed on its website? So first of all, I see the language has a really strong focus on being recognized as internationalized. So it really wants to be recognized as a game changer, as the one who can really make some differences and transform the Chinese landscape. So for example, I have an example here. It comes from one of the university news that the examination-oriented culture has been positioned as a really different thing with this university's transformative emancipatory learner-centered pedagogy. So it's kind of it want to be very different from the traditional Chinese universities, but to be a game changer, transformative game changer of Chinese HE. And also, I feel like the tone, the general note in this website gives me a feeling that they are defining they don't feel the necessity to define internationalization, but rather they are kind of taken for granted. So I have an example here that this University X, they claims to have a right set of tools, skills, and networks to internationalize this workforce, but I didn't really find any justification or how they understand internationalization on their website. So I assume that it's because that they see this as a taken for granted phenomenon that does not need to be really critically engaged with it. I also found that in terms of the language use, it has a very ambivalent attitude. So firstly, I see that, you know, in a lot of pictures and captions, it said 100% English medium. However, if you dig deeper in terms of how it reflectively demonstrates on its other pages, you can see there is a reflective attitude where you can see from this quote that increasing internationalization at university is not just about speaking English. So that gives me a feeling that it's kind of really ambivalent about the language use. And sometimes it has a risk of perpetuating certain assumptions about internationalization that X seems to be avoid of. So that's kind of really paradoxical and ambivalent. So as I said, it's reflective and also it kind of saying that internationalization should be something reflective. So for example, it actively acknowledges its elite tendency and saying that it is not good. So the new educational models will not happen overnight, and the elite system should be optimized. They should never forget where they started. So this shows that internationalization as a phenomenon which needs constantly reflecting and looking back. So yeah, these are the institutional construction of internationalization. So how about its stuff? So in terms of the stuff, in terms of the returnee staff that I have been interviewed. So firstly, although University X has been really reflective and everything, but they still consider this kind of TNHE as a substitute to Western universities. So they feel like they have this competitive advantage in speaking English, and they assume that this will help them to survive and thrive in an international environment without challenges. However, there are challenges indeed. But they didn't really expect these challenges because they prepare themselves more as an employee rather than language instructors. And it turns out that with overwhelming Chinese student percentage in this campus, so the returning staff feel like they are relying more on Chinese language or some experiences developed in China rather than rely on their English or their experience when they are overseas. So this poses as a bit shock and challenges to this returning staff. So this gives them an opportunity to reconsider what internationalization means to them. So they feel like there is a conflict between really fulfill X internationalization agenda and conducting their professional practice that they, in a way, they believe most efficiently support this student. So this basically means that to be perfectly aligned with its internationalization agenda, they have to go 100% English. However, in reality, students would be appreciating more if they use Chinese to either to explain complicated concepts or to give them more relevant examples in Chinese. That's why they feel this conflict to being a perfect employee, that to obey university rules and how to effectively support students. So that's why it sometimes give participants this kind of feeling that when internationalization was supposed to be inclusive and horizon broadening, it actually narrowing down student scope and can become very exclusive in practice. That's why they are trying to doing their best to help students, although sometimes they're doing it with their own risk of breaking the university's rules. So finally, how about students? How are they engaged with internationalization? Firstly, when they come to this university, so this is very similar to stuff. They're saying that as a substitute to Western environment, and they feel like this is a almost guaranteed capital to help them, studying abroad in future. So students are perceiving this kind of TNHE as a stepping stone. And from my data, I also found out that this kind of perception of TNHE as a stepping stone has been actually legitimized by University X. So I remember one of students saying that when X is promoting itself to students, it kind of saying that they have a very high admission rate to Western universities. So this is some kind of deliberate choice to promote itself as a stepping stone. And that's why students are changing from being very compromised because of their undesirable university entrance examination grade to being motivated of involving in a university that could serve as a stepping stone to Western universities. And also their expectation of internationalization has been largely shaped by the language requirement. This is similar to the lit review that they see that language environment is very distinct from other Chinese universities, which they either being really confident or they binge preparing to get into this exclusive English environment. And they also expect internationalization means more free and open space that's distinguished from other non-TNHE institutions. And also there are students who have been experiencing Western HE, expecting those would be TNHE would be nothing different. It will be similar. And so when they actually experience internationalization, kind of University X actually have Chinese sessions. This is quite surprising to students. They feel like this is not what they sign up for. However, after some time, they gradually appreciate these Chinese sessions because they begin to appreciate these Chinese sessions can actually enhance their grades. So they do not really see improving English as a necessary route. So they can actually enhance their grade using other routes. So, for example, studying in Chinese. I think my general note here is that students are making the most of the internationalized environment. So an internationalized environment is kind of unintentionally helpful. I say unintentional because the university are really emphasizing this English improvement and hope students to improve both their language ability and enhance their academic grades. However, students are really challenging this route of achieving internationalization. Actually, they tell me that they value a student-centered classroom as a useful preparation for studying abroad. So although it is still about studying abroad, but they kind of shifting their focus to a student-centeredness rather than just an immersive English environment. However, their utilization of internationalization are less supported. So institutions are still hoping that they could use English. So this is generally lack of institutional support. So finally, sorry, I know it's kind of taking a long way to achieve my conclusion, but yeah, I just want to reiterate so kind of my general research question. So my answer to has international joint university lived up to its promises has been further developed to my two questions. Like, first of all, does international joint university have a constant promise in the first place? So if you can remember that my website analysis shows a lot of ambivalences and inconsistencies. So this is showing that they are still deciding to which to demonstrate, whether it is subject to the neoliberal discourse of attracting students or to be more reflectively engaged in developing to a independent international joint entity. So it doesn't seem to have a consistent promise in the first place. And also, if this promise also comes with a prescribed way of stakeholders to benefit, does it allow some room for stakeholders to be creative? So that kind of bring my second question that I want to end, which is that, so what if this kind of university, they are actually fulfilling its promise, but rather in an unexpected way? So in a lot of vacancies show in teacher and student accounts, they are actually being international. They're bringing international expertises. They are actively developing interculturality and the general student-centered vibe of the classroom. So how isn't that internationalization? But this has not been legitimized or really defined as a promotional priority of international joint university. So lastly, I would say that some of my suggestions to this kind of university as an academic is to, maybe it's not the best way to rely on internationalization as some form of accidental serendipity where students happen to benefit from student-centered pedagogy to passive bilingual education. So rather, the focus should really be how to think about how to align promotional discourse, and providing reasonable international exposure, and how can they adopting a more open attitude towards linguistic use. Right. I'm gonna end here. I'm sorry if I take too much of the time. Thank you.
That's all right, Bowen, and thanks very much for opening up that particular window for us and take us into that institution and its contradictions in internationalization. I mean, internationalization performs a very interesting role in China because it, I mean, the Gaokao is really tough. It's one big competition nationwide. People go into that in unequal terms, but everyone in it, whether they're from a privileged family or an urban family or not, you know, undergoes an agonizing process of preparing for it for years right through secondary school. And there's no other route really within the Chinese system. There's no other way in which you can come forward. And that's different to other countries where you might have a plurality of routes into elite universities and so on. And some forms sometimes of second chance entry and into professional training at a strong level and so on. You know, there in Western Europe, North America, typically there's a range of different ways you can move forward. There's a privileged route, if you like, but there's also others that can bring you in the end to that same goal. But in China, the Gaokao is everything. So internationalization provides the other route. You know, it's the alternative way to move forward in life. It gives you by accessing English language, usually instruction through secondary school, perhaps at first degree stage or at the beginning of a first degree, you are possibly stopping in China at the end of halfway through secondary school and moving abroad at that stage. using this sort of English language route, there's a chance that maybe you can get into a strong university abroad and come back to China with that qualification. And that's obviously worked for some people. So, but, there are a lot of others who are trying to make it work who don't have such happy outcomes. But it is an alternative to the Gaokao. It does give, some kind of flexibility to Chinese families. The problem is, of course, that the money, you have to be able to afford the English language route, especially when going abroad, and also it's a B stream in academic terms. So there is that sort of cloud that's over you when you follow that pathway outside the mainstream Gaokao pathway. You've sort of done this because you're not confident you can compete successfully in the Gaokao, and that's the sort of standard of value. So there is those two things that qualify as a route a bit. But it's interesting, and it has been important to a minority of families, and it continues to drive the international education industry. And I don't think people realize that in the receiving countries that receive Chinese students, how important that configuration is of internationalization as a sort of second line of social mobility alongside the mainstream Gaokao. But there's a question about this, is it going to stay the same in future? There's some signs that China, as policy-wise, is moving away from English language usage, for example. And I understand that it's no longer going to be compulsory to the end of school, if that's already be the case. And I think it's becoming harder for the English language specializing institutions inside China to get the right to operate and so on. So, I suppose that's my first question for you: is China moving away from internationalization as an objective? And I've got a second question for you as well.
Sorry, the first question is China moving away from internationalization?
Well, of this kind, this English language, this foreign language courses and institutions, alternate stream to the Gaokao, people going abroad. That's been generally encouraged until recently, with English language being so important in China. Is that changing?
Right. So, well, I think it's really important to in my thesis as well, because I just feel like I kind of conceptualize this kind of internationalization as a reduced form of internationalization. So they kind of bringing down a lot of complicated aspects just into a language aspect of internationalization. So I think they are kind of using this kind of teenage as a reduced form of internationalization. So they are kind of imitating some of the Western aspects to internationalize, but they are not really looking at those. They're not really looking at those contradictions and inconsistencies. So regarding if China is moving away from this kind of I would say its legacy is still very, very influential. So it's very hard to change people's mindsets that although there are maybe some certain programs or institutions are moving away from this kind of exclusive usage, but the legacy, I would say, is still very strong, and students are still choosing this institution because of these very reasons, and same of their families or and also the academic staff who are thinking about working in this kind of institution. Yeah, this is my view.
Well, quickly, I'll give you one more question and then bring in some of those other people who've suddenly appeared in the chat. I mean, is internationalization just about English language learning, or is it about knowledge of the world more generally and about other languages aside from Chinese and English?
Yeah. This is also a question my supervisor constantly, challenged me of why you're saying internationalization, but all you're saying is English and language. I would say that English is kind of, in my case, university is kind of a important symbol of of to represent internationalization. So they choose English as a really it's an easy way, it's kind of a shortcut. So internationalization, they encompasses a whole range of factors, knowledges, interactions, but language is really simple. It's really quantifiable. It's really easy to monitor whether this university has achieved 100% English usage. So I guess it's also very, neoliberal tendency of quantify everything to measure their level and extent of internationalization. Yeah, that's kind of my feeling. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's bring in a couple of more questions, and I'm going to read Fernando Herrera's question, because Fernando has told me to do that and can't come onto a mic.
Sure.
Now, Fernando's question for everyone is, one, is internalization, which I guess means internationalization.
Yes, I guess so.
Basic Western exposure for Chinese students, question mark. If so, what are the main countries of interest, since the West is a big entity? This is like my question. One would think the US, but what about countries inside Europe? Is it just Anglophone countries? So there's that question again. And the second question is from Hui Yuan Ye, and I'm going to ask Hui Yuan to come on to the webinar at this point. Are you there, Hui Yuan? There you are.
Hi, Simon, and hi, Boven.
Hi.
Very nice to see you. And I would like to say that I have the privilege to be as you said, a returning staff at one of the Chinese JV myself. So your presentation really rings a lot of bells. So I have two specific questions here for you. One is about, I'm most interested in this lack of impetus to conceptualize internationalization themselves by these JVs. Why did they not seize this opportunity? Is it because of the university leaders, or have you had an opportunity to look into their perhaps academic background, which might be a factor? Because based on my experience, I think that the top leadership, the top leader of a Chinese JV in the sense, needs to be a Chinese person. Is that correct? Coupled with a foreign, second man in charge, which might be a foreign academic person. Is that correct or not? This is my first question. Which, let me see. I think I have a second one. Right. Oh, and could it also be because that there are competing notions about internationalization from the Chinese government, which might keep these JVs quiet about their own conceptualization of this idea? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Should I answer or?
I think.
I mean, should I answer now or?
Yes, no,
okay. Yeah, that's enough for me to answer now, I guess. So for the first question from Fernando, that is internationalization basic Western. Sorry, I don't think I really get this. Do they mean basically or basic? I just sorry, I just tried to.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Sure, thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
I don't want to engage because I'm cooking something, but anyways, is internationalization basic exposure to the West? Point one. Point two, the West is very big. What about the West? And in other words, when the Chinese students look at the world, what do they want through the English language? And is it only the English language that they're interested in? Thank you.
Is there more to it than Hollywood? I think is the question,
Thank you.
Right. So first question is about the Western exposure thing. Well, I guess internationalization is has first come to students' mind as a really outcome-oriented and practical way. So they are trying. If we say that internationalization is equal to some Western exposure, I think it's mainly also for their chance to going abroad afterwards. So they hope to be exposed and prepare themselves to be more familiar with this Western world in order to be actually geographically mobile in the future, I guess. And also, yeah, so about the Western, what are the main countries of the interest, since Western is a really big entity? Yeah, I agree with that. But I think, particularly in my case, students are generally interested in English-speaking countries. So since my case, University X is a China-UK cooperative entity, so I think a lot of students would be influenced by the UK, the way of curriculum design, assessment in the UK. And also that, yeah, I forgot to put that in my slide. That thanks, Fernando, to remind me of that. Is that their US is also a really influential Western in X discourse. So they kind of they justify that they are bringing Chinese, UK, and US educational essence into its campus. However, they do not really justify why US should be on the picture. Yeah, so that's Fernando's question. And also for Hui Yuan's question around the returning academics, how would I explain the lack of impetus to conceptualize internationalization? So my first explanation of this is that they are taking internationalization as taken for granted, that they it's naturally they see that it is naturally very progressive and transformative, which is to also establish its own academic entity as a independent game changer of higher education. So that would be my reason to see this, why there is a lack of it, because they don't see the necessity to really explain that. And also, I think I'm not sure if there is a competing notions of internationalization also from Chinese government, because as I see it, so TNHE has a relative extent of autonomy, at least how they really design their website. I would say that it can be less controlled by the Chinese government. And also similarly, Chinese government also does, maybe it's not like maybe it's kind of partial, but from the a lot of policy documents. So for example, there's documents on the regulations of Chinese foreign cooperation of running schools. There is no definition of internationalization either. So if you say there is competing, there has to be there. But from my research, neither the government nor the institution has really talk about their understanding. So yeah, that might be a future research area to, balancing the competing notions of it. So I hope I answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Now, I think we'll try and squeeze in a couple of the remaining people.
Sure, I will speak faster as well.
I'm going to ask people to speak really briefly, but they're good questions. So we do want them dealt with. Andrea Lane, and then Catherine Montgomery. I'll bring the two of you in now. Andrea, are you there, please?
Yes. Hey, just a quick question. So I see one of the trends especially among British schools in China, or joint ventures or branch campuses, that they increasingly naturally replace British foreigners with Chinese staff, Chinese returnees. And that kind of undermines the whole idea of providing, undermines the whole idea of providing British education or international Western education, in sense of often a lack of critical thinking goes lost. The kind of pedagogies we want to actually bring that are different from the Chinese way of doing things. So I just wonder, do you see that happening, a kind of anti-transnationalization? And if so, where do you see that going? Because I feel a lot of that happening, Xi'an Xiaotong, Nottingham University, etc. They're becoming increasingly Chinese rather than international. Thank you.
Right.
Wait, Bowen, we've got Catherine as well.
Yeah, my question was quite similar to that, Bowen. Thank you very much. Are you seeing a kind of sea change in the way China's, constructing its TNE? I think Zhejiang International Campus is a good example where they've kind of chosen the research institutes that they want and constructed their own campus. And as you know, Zhejiang province itself has a kind of 4+0 policy where it wants to keep the students in China. So I was just wondering whether that's a different kind of set of promises, really coming from a different set of places. And one final thing, I was just wondering if you were familiar with the work of Ly Ha Pham, who's Vietnamese and writes very interesting and quite critical work on transnational, and she's written quite recently on staff perspectives on that. I'll put the link to her work in the chat if that helps.
Thank you. So I can start answering these questions briefly. Okay. Okay, sure. So for the first one coming from Andrea, Andrea is asking the anti-trend thing, to TNHE and AH. So yeah, I also see this. I think this is particularly after the pandemic situation. There are a lot of universities are they have diminishing ability to attract international staff anymore. So I think after COVID, there are definitely a trend going away from hiring international staff, and also that's at the same time where these TNHE are adding more Chinese specific cultural and ideological lessons to this TNHE entity as well. So yeah, definitely there is any trend, but I'm not sure if this is gonna be a trend, because I really see that as a risk managing approach of them, because these are happening really after they lack the ability to attract international staff, and then they're turning inwardly to its Chineseness. So maybe that kind of seemed like a risk managing thing to me, and but coupled with that, there are also policy like I don't know if you're familiar with this, I don't know if it's replacement policy where if you have this offer from top university, then you can just directly go to transnational this TNHE institution. So I think it's kind of reinforce its status of being a stepping stone. So I'm not really sure I would call it anti-trend. So yeah, so that's kind of to Andrea, and also for Catherine. Catherine is saying that, sorry, kind of I need to rewind a little bit. Sorry. Our international campus are changing their promises of TNE. I think, yeah, so my answer would be more or less similar to the last one, that they are so the Chineseness is developing undoubtedly. They're seeing more cultural advancements, and still students are more willing to engage in the Chineseness of it. But is that really universities, do they really want to do that or align with that, or is just really a thing they're going with because they're failing to attract international staff? So I'm not really sure this is a they're actually changing fundamentally. So yeah, this would be my observation at this point. Thank you.
I think that topic is worth a whole webinar. I mean,
Yes.
but it's
Yes,
hard
indeed.
to talk about all of it. But you know what's happening in China. I mean, there is some kind of closure going on, but not wholly so at all in international dealings, and lots of the doors are still open. But I have a sense in my own work there that people are turning inwards more. It is shifting. But anyway, time will tell. But I think, you know, whether people are required to change their policy or they adopt to the environment or they rationalize their failure to attract international staff and therefore become more China-centered, you know, it doesn't really matter. But, you know, one way or the other, there may be a shift going on. Bowen, I think what happens when you do a paper on a country, and China is the largest country of all, really, in higher education terms, you then have to become an expert on, you know, almost anything that people throw at you. So, you know, you've handled it well in that sense, and congratulations on your presentation today, and thanks very much. We look forward to the news that you've graduated successfully and you're publishing your doctorate outcomes. So good luck with that, and we hope to see you on the webinar when next we meet next Thursday. So thanks to everyone for your participation, and let me say bye for now.